My son and I were living out of a dilapidated Honda Civic for 6 brutal months, while my late wife's family sipped vintage champagne in the house I had built with my bare hands. They said I was on my own. They said I was a leech. They looked at a grieving widower and a disabled man and saw nothing but dead weight to be discarded. Then, a lawyer knocked on the frosted window of my car at 2 in the morning. I stared at her, my breath fogging the glass, assuming it was the police telling us to move along. But she didn't have a ticket. She had paperwork. It was a deed to a 12-unit luxury apartment building, fully rented out and generating $25,000 a month in pure profit. 1 week later, the color drained from my entitled sister-in-law's face, so fast I genuinely thought she was having a stroke. The lawyer informed her that her employer, a dying billionaire who owned half the city, had requested my presence before signing his final last will and testament. Why me? Because 40 years ago, I was the only general contractor in this corrupted city who refused to steal from him. It all started on a Tuesday, the kind of unforgiving November night in Chicago, where the wind doesn't blow. It feels like it has a personal vendetta against your existence. The public library was closing. For the last few months, that municipal building had been our only sanctuary. The radiators hissed with beautiful, consistent heat. The reading rooms were blessedly quiet, and the public bathrooms were clean enough to wash a grown man's face without catching a disease. My son Leo is 38 years old, but his mind forcibly stopped aging the day a 2-ton steel beam collapsed on him at a construction site 10 years ago. He was sitting cross-legged on the threadbare carpet in the biography section, absorbed in a book filled with glossy pictures of vintage trains. He loves trains to Leo. The world is a simple place of primary colors and loud noises. He started coughing, a deep rattling sound that seemed to shake his terribly thin frame. The head librarian, a kind-eyed woman who had bent the rules to let us stay past closing time on more than one occasion, finally walked over. She didn't look me in the eye. People rarely do when you've fallen off the edge of society. She looked up at the large wall clock. "I know," I said, my voice thick with exhaustion. "We're going, thank you for the shelter." Getting Leo up and moving is a painstaking process. His legs get stiff when the temperature drops, a lingering side effect of the multiple surgeries that saved his life but ruined his mobility. I wrapped his knitted scarf tighter around his neck, the same blue scarf his mother, Martha, had knitted for him months before the cancer finally took her from us. "Come on, buddy," I whispered, forcing a gentle smile. "Time to go on patrol." That was the lie I told him. I told him we weren't homeless. I told him we were on a classified secret patrol mission to keep the city safe. It was the only psychological trick I had left to keep him from being utterly terrified of the encroaching dark. We walked out through the heavy glass doors, and the biting wind hit us like a physical blow. My battered '99 Honda Civic was parked 3 blocks away in a dimly lit alley to avoid being towed, but I knew we couldn't go back there yet. It was simply too cold to turn the engine off, and I only had a quarter tank of gas left to last us until the soup kitchen opened on Friday. I reached into the pocket of my worn jacket. $7.40. I didn't need to count it. I knew the exact weight of those coins. That was it. That was my entire net worth after 50 years of breaking my back laying bricks, pouring concrete, and building the skyline of this city. Down the street, the flickering neon sign of a late-night burger joint buzzed in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it represented heat. We walked inside, and the overwhelming smell of cheap grease, frying onions and stale coffee hit my senses like a luxury perfume. We slid into a cracked vinyl booth in the corner. I ordered 1 single cheeseburger and a plastic cup of tap water. When the food arrived, I carefully cut the burger in half. "You eat, Leo," I said, pushing the flimsy paper plate toward him. "Dad's not hungry tonight." It was a blatant lie. My stomach was twisting itself into agonizing knots, but watching my son eat was the only thing that kept me tethered to my sanity. He ate with the pure, messy joy of a child, getting a streak of yellow mustard on his chin. I reached across the table with a rough paper napkin to wipe it away. That is when the bells on the front door chimed. A massive blast of freezing air followed a group of 3 men draped in expensive, tailored wool coats. I immediately ducked my head. I had learned quickly on the unforgiving streets that making eye contact with wealthy strangers was an open invitation for trouble, but didn't need to see his face to recognize the voice. It was a booming, profoundly arrogant laugh that I hadn't heard since the rainy afternoon we buried my wife. Richard Sterling's. My entitled brother-in-law. The man who was currently sitting comfortably in the CEO chair of the real estate empire my wife's father had founded. The exact same man who had personally signed the safety inspection checks on the construction site where my son's skull was crushed 10 years ago. I tried to shrink further into the cracked vinyl of the booth. Please, God, I prayed silently, let them get their overpriced black coffees and leave. But life is rarely that merciful. Leo saw the men, specifically. He saw the shiny gold Rolex gleaming on Richard's wrist as the man swaggered past our table. Leo has an innocent fascination with shiny things. He reached out, his coordination clumsy and erratic from the cold and the permanent brain injury. His trembling hand accidentally knocked over our plastic cup of water. It wasn't hot, thank goodness, but the ice water splashed directly onto the toe of Richard Sterling's $3,000 Italian leather loafers. The entire restaurant went dead silent. The faint hum of the deep fryer was the only sound left. Richard jumped back as if he had been physically struck, cursing loudly. He looked down at his shoe like it had been doused in hydrochloric acid. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy idiot," he snarled, his face twisting in disgust. Then, he looked up. He looked at Leo, who was immediately trembling, trying to hide his face behind his scarred hands. Then, Richard's gaze shifted to me. The recognition dawned on his face slowly, followed by a sneering smirk that was uglier than any physical scar. "Well, well, well," Richard announced, his voice deliberately loud enough for the cashier and the few other patrons to hear. "Look who we have here, the great Harold Bennett. Patricia told me you were living rough, but I honestly didn't think you had sunk this pathetically low." Leo started to whimper, a high-pitched sound of pure distress. I stood up slowly, placing a firm, calloused hand on my son's shaking shoulder to calm him. "We're leaving, Richard," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "We don't want any trouble." Richard smoothly stepped sideways, intentionally blocking the narrow aisle. He wasn't going to let this moment of public humiliation go. He turned to his two business partners, gesturing toward us like we were exhibits in a freak show. "You guys know this loser, right? This is my late wife's sister's husband. Used to be a big-shot contractor in the 80s. Now look at him, splitting a $1 menu burger with the retard." My blood ran cold. I felt a dangerous blinding heat rising in the back of my neck. My hands balled into tight fists, the knuckles popping in the quiet room. "You can say whatever the hell you want about me, Richard," I growled, stepping 1 inch closer, closing the distance between us. "But don't ever talk about my son." Richard threw his head back and laughed. It was a dry, utterly hollow sound. "Or what, hell? You're going to hit me? You can't even afford a public defender to bail you out of the drunk tank." Patricia was right. "You're nothing but a leech. You drained Martha's bank accounts for her pointless medical treatments. And now you're probably stalking me looking for a handout." He reached into the pocket of his tailored coat and casually pulled out a crisp $20 bill. He didn't hand it to me. He crumpled it up into a tight ball and deliberately threw it onto the greasy, dirty tile floor right next to the puddle of spilled water. "There," Richard said, adjusting his silk tie with a satisfied smile. "Go buy some adult diapers for the boy, and maybe a breath mint for yourself. You smell like an open sewer." The room remained dead silent. Everyone was watching. The $20 bill lay on the floor, soaking up the dirty water. It was more cash than I had seen in a week. It could buy a quarter tank of gas. It could buy Leo a hot breakfast of eggs and bacon tomorrow morning. All I had to do was bend my knees, reach down, and pick it up. All I had to do was utterly swallow the last shred of my human dignity. Leo looked at the crumpled green paper, then up at my face. "Dad," he asked, his voice shaking with fear, "did I do bad?" "I'm sorry, Leo," I said, making sure my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly steady. "You did nothing wrong." I looked Richard Sterling dead in the eye. I desperately wanted to smash his perfectly capped teeth in. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs about the massive insurance payout they had intentionally withheld from us. I wanted to scream about the beautiful home they had maliciously foreclosed on the week after Martha's funeral. But I knew the harsh reality of the system. If I laid a single finger on him, I would go to a concrete jail cell, and Leo would be immediately surrendered to the horrific nightmare of the state welfare system. That was what they wanted. They wanted me to snap. "Keep your money, Richard," I said, my voice eerily calm, possessing a chilling edge that wiped the smirk off his face for a fraction of a second. "You are going to need it a hell of a lot more than I do." I firmly grabbed Leo's hand and we walked right past them. I stepped directly over the $20 bill, deliberately tracking a wet footprint across it. I didn't look back, even as Richard scoffed loudly and called me a stubborn, pathetic fool. We walked back out into the freezing Chicago night. The wind hit us instantly, slicing straight through my thin jacket like a serrated knife. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. It was the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "I'm cold, Dad," Leo whispered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "I know, son," I said, unlocking the stiff door of the Honda Civic. "I know." We climbed into the cramped back seat. I had a small pile of moving blankets I had scavenged from a dumpster behind a cheap motel. I immediately covered Leo up, meticulously tucking the rough edges around his shoulders, like I used to do when he was a baby sleeping in his crib. I climbed in right next to him, wrapping my arms around his shaking frame, desperately using my own fading body heat to keep him warm. I stared blankly out the frosted window at the dark, desolate parking lot. I closed my eyes, fighting back the hot tears of profound shame. A man manages to hold his pride together for a long time. But that night, watching my disabled son shiver in the dark, simply because I was too proud to pick up a $20 bill, I felt like I had fundamentally failed as a father. I was 70 years old. I had built towering skyscrapers. I had employed hundreds of hard-working men. And now, I couldn't even keep my own son warm. I didn't know that 2 miles away, inside a warmly lit, luxury apartment building, a massive secret was patiently waiting. A secret that would soon turn Richard Sterling's arrogant laughter into a desperate, pleading scream. I didn't know that the clock was already rapidly ticking down on their absolute destruction. All I knew was the biting cold, and the solemn vow I whispered into the freezing darkness of that car. "I am going to fix this, Leo. I swear on your mother's grave, I'm going to fix this." The heater in my '99 Honda Civic was slowly dying a loud, rattling death. It sounded like a heavy canvas bag filled with marbles being shaken vigorously, every single time I tentatively turned the cheap plastic fan dial past the first setting. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine idling, nervously watching the illuminated orange needle on the fuel gauge hover precariously above the red line. Leo was already deeply asleep in the cramped back seat. I gently adjusted the rearview mirror to look at him. He was tightly curled into a defensive ball beneath 3 heavy layers of wool-moving blankets I had scavenged. His breath came out in small, visible white puffs that stubbornly lingered in the stagnant, freezing air of the car. Seeing him like that, sleeping with his mouth slightly open, trusting me unconditionally to keep the harsh realities of the world away, broke my heart in a fundamental way that Richard Sterling's crude insults never possibly could. I turned the key and killed the engine. The silence that instantly followed was heavy, absolute, and immediate. The aggressive Chicago cold began to rapidly creep back in through the thin metal doors within seconds. I reached blindly into the plastic cup holder and pulled out the small handful of spare change I had left. $7.40. I meticulously counted it again by the dim orange light of a street lamp filtering through the frosted window. 4 quarters, 3 dimes, and a severely crumpled $5 bill. This was it. This was everything I had to my name. My hands were extremely rough, the skin deeply cracked and permanently stained from 50 grueling years of handling brick, mortar, and steel, but they were visibly shaking as I held those cold coins. I wasn't shaking from the freezing temperature. I was shaking from the boiling toxic rage that I constantly kept bottled up inside. The silent rage that relentlessly kept me awake while my son peacefully slept. My exhausted mind drifted agonizingly back to the exact day that had put us in this frozen parking lot. 6 months ago, the dreary day we buried my beloved Martha, it had been raining. Of course it was raining. The entire Sterling family stood together on one side of the open grave, safely huddled under a massive canopy of expensive black umbrellas, remaining perfectly dry and pristine. I stood alone on the other side with Leo, getting totally soaked to the bone, because I had generously given my only umbrella to an elderly neighbor who had taken the bus to come pay her respects. Immediately after the brief service, Patricia Sterling had marched right up to me. She didn't offer a warm hug, She didn't offer a standard condolence. She shoved a thick manila envelope into my chest. I foolishly thought it was a final letter from Martha. I opened it with trembling, rain-slicked fingers. It was a formal notice of eviction. Martha died with significant debt, Hal, Patricia had said, her voice smooth and utterly devoid of any human emotion. Her experimental medical bills were astronomical. The house is leveraged, the bank is taking it, and since you willingly signed those legal papers, transferring power of attorney to me when she abruptly went into the coma, I have already liquidated the remaining assets to cover the angry creditors. I had stared at her, the cold rain dripping off my nose directly onto the legal paper. But that house is paid for, I had stammered, confusion clouding my grief. I personally built that massive rear addition with my own 2 hands. Martha clearly told me we were safe. Patricia had sighed loudly, the exact condescending way one sighs at a slow, frustrating child. Martha boldly lied to protect your fragile ego, Hal. She secretly knew you couldn't handle the harsh financial truth. You are destitute. The family has privately discussed it at length. We aren't going to support your lifestyle. You are on your own. I had tried desperately to fight it. I went to the local bank branch. I sat for hours at the legal aid office. But Patricia Sterling had the ironclad paperwork. She had the vicious, high-priced corporate lawyers. She had the powerful Sterling family name. Within 1 week, the locks on my home were changed. Within 1 month, my meager personal savings were drained, trying to fight a massive legal battle I couldn't possibly win. And now, here I was, desperately counting nickels in a Walmart parking lot, terrified that the local police would tap on the window and demand I move along. I quickly checked my scratched watch. It was 2:17 in the morning. My eyes were heavy, actively burning with severe exhaustion. I leaned my aching head back against the stiff headrest and slowly closed my eyes, listening to the bitter wind angrily howl outside. I must have finally drifted off, because the sharp sound that woke me wasn't the wind. Knock, knock, knock. My heart immediately hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sat up straight, my primal instinct for flight kicking in. I looked out the driver's side window. A shadowy figure was standing right there, silhouetted against the bright parking lot security lights. I couldn't see a police uniform, but that didn't mean anything out here. Private security guards were sometimes significantly worse than the actual police. They didn't ask you to leave. They genuinely liked to rough you up first. I deliberately didn't roll down the window. I stared, praying they would simply assume the car was empty and move on. Knock, knock, knock. It was much more persistent this time, sharp, demanding, and authoritative. Mr. Bennett. A voice came clearly through the thin glass. It was a woman's voice, not a loud shout, but clear and confident. I know you're in there. Please, I urgently need to talk to you. I hesitated. A woman alone in this dangerous part of town at 2 in the morning? It didn't make any logical sense. I quickly looked in the back seat. Leo was still deeply asleep, totally undisturbed. I took a deep, shaky breath, tightly gripped the cold door handle, and rolled the window down 2 inches. Enough to hear, enough to speak, yeah? I said, my voice gravelly from sleep and prolonged disuse. What do you want? The woman boldly stepped closer into the harsh light. She wasn't a cop. She was immaculately dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored gray pantsuit that probably cost significantly more than my entire car. She had a thick, luxurious cashmere coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, and she was tightly holding a premium leather briefcase. Her dark hair was severely pulled back in a tight, professional bun. She looked like she had confidently walked out of a high-stakes corporate boardroom, not a freezing parking lot. "Mr. Hal Bennett?" she asked, her breath misting in the frigid air. "Who's asking at 2 in the morning?" I replied, instantly defensive. "My name is Catherine Vance," she stated calmly. "I am a senior attorney with the law firm Vance & Associates. I have been looking for you for 3 solid weeks." I let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. "If you're standing here to serve me more legal papers from the Sterling family, you can honestly save the postage stamp. I don't have anything left for them to take. Unless they want the spare tire in the trunk." Catherine Vance didn't laugh. She didn't even crack a polite smile. Her expression remained dead serious, almost intense. She briefly looked past me into the cluttered back seat where Leo was sleeping. Her sharp eyes noticeably softened for a tiny fraction of a second, then snapped back to me with a cold steeliness that genuinely surprised me. I don't work for the Sterlings, Mr. Bennett, she said, her tone dropping. In fact, my wealthy client has spent a considerable amount of money, specifically ensuring the Sterlings don't know. I'm standing here talking to you. I frowned, thoroughly confused. What the hell are you talking about? She confidently held up a thick manila folder. Can I please come in? It is freezing out here, and what I urgently have to show you physically can't be discussed through a 2-inch crack in a car window. I carefully looked at her, and then I looked at the mysterious folder. My survival gut told me to turn the key and drive away, but my burning curiosity and the freezing cold that was deeply seeping into my aging bones told me to wait. I unlocked the heavy doors. She briskly walked around to the passenger side and gracefully slid in. The car dipped slightly under her added weight. She immediately brought with her the rich smell of expensive artisan coffee and old legal paper. She quickly closed the door and shivered, rubbing her leather-gloved hands together. Thank you, she said briskly. I didn't answer. I watched her suspiciously. She smoothly clicked open her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of official documents. She reached up and flipped on the weak dome light. The sudden brightness made me squint. Mr. Bennett, she began, precisely opening the heavy file. How long have you been sleeping in this freezing vehicle? 6 months, I said flatly, stubbornly refusing to hide the deep shame. She nodded slowly, precisely as if confirming a complex calculation. And in those agonizing 6 months, has anyone from the legal estate of Martha Bennett contacted you regarding the commercial property located at 402 Oak Street? I slowly shook my head. I don't know what that is. Martha didn't own any commercial property. Patricia told me everything was gone, liquidated to aggressive creditors. Catherine looked at me. It was a complex look of profound human pity mixed with a simmering, dangerous anger, not directed at me, but for me. She reached into the file and formally handed me a heavy document. It was a legal property deed. It featured a thick gold official seal pressed at the bottom, and a cursive signature I would recognize anywhere. Martha Bennett. The official date on this certified deed is precisely 20 years ago. Catherine stated smoothly, forcefully pointing to the ink line. Martha quietly bought a massive commercial apartment building. 12 luxury units, solid brick construction. It is located 2 miles from where we're currently sitting freezing right now. She deliberately bought it under her maiden name specifically, so the Sterlings wouldn't know it existed. She wanted an ironclad safety net for you, for Leo. I stared blankly at the legal paper. The bold black letters swam before my tired eyes. A building. Martha had a luxury building. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice breaking. If she had this massive asset, why? Why the hell are we out here freezing to death? Because, Catherine said, her voice dropping an entire octave, becoming dangerous. Patricia Sterling maliciously filed a fraudulent sworn affidavit claiming you were missing and totally mentally incompetent the week after the funeral. She legally appointed herself as the temporary emergency trustee of this specific asset. For the last 6 agonizing months, she has been quietly collecting the rent. My mouth went dry. How much? I croaked. Catherine flipped to the next page, a certified bank statement. The printed numbers were bold and staggering. The massive building is fully occupied, Mr. Bennett, she stated clinically. It consistently generates $25,000 a month in pure net profit. That staggering amount of money has been quietly going straight into a hidden account, totally controlled by Patricia. $25,000. I slowly looked down at the pathetic $7 sitting in my cup holder. I looked back at my disabled son, shivering in the cramped back seat. I felt like the entire physical world was tilting on its axis. I said, the horrifying realization hitting me like a physical suffocating blow. She ruthlessly stole everything while we froze, yes, Catherine agreed simply. But that ends tonight. She confidently reached into her tailored pocket and pulled out a heavy set of brass keys. They jingled a bright metallic, expensive sound in the painfully quiet car. She placed them firmly into my rough, dirt-stained palm. This is the official master key to the entire building, she stated. And this is the key to the massive luxury penthouse unit. It is vacant. It is fully furnished. It has glorious heat. It has endless hot water and, Mr. Bennett, it legally belongs to you. I gripped the cold metal keys so hard they dug into my calloused skin. Hot tears unexpectedly welled up in my eyes, fast and uncontrollable. I couldn't stop them. Why? I asked, my voice shattering. Why the hell are you actively helping me if you don't work for the Sterlings? Who do you work for? Catherine smoothly closed the manila folder. Her facial expression profoundly shifted. The rigid professional mask deliberately slipped, quickly revealing something urgent. I am helping you because it's my paid job, she stated. But I'm sitting in this freezing car at 2 in the morning because my employer is rapidly running out of precious time. He has been closely watching the Sterling family for a long time. He intimately knows what they ruthlessly did to you. And he knows what you did for him 40 years ago. For him? I wiped my wet eyes. I don't know any damn billionaires you do, she countered. You haven't physically seen him since you were a young, stubborn man. His name is Preston Galloway, and he has one massive, non-negotiable condition for his help. She paused, looking deep into my eyes, making sure I heard every single syllable. He is actively dying, Hal, and he refuses to sign his final last will and testament until he physically looks you straight in the eye. I sat there, utterly stunned. Preston Galloway, the legendary real estate mogul, the ruthless man who practically owned half the skyline of this city. I dimly remembered a young, ambitious man, with massive dreams and empty pockets, who I had personally helped fix a severely cracked foundation for back in the early 80s. I had forgotten about him, but clearly he hadn't forgotten me, so, Catherine stated firmly, confidently putting her gloved hand on the door handle. The only question is, Mr. Bennett, why the hell are you still sleeping in this freezing vehicle when you legally own a luxury heated building 2 miles down the street? I looked down at the heavy brass keys in my shaking hand. Then I slowly looked at the rearview mirror. Leo shifted uncomfortably in his restless sleep, quietly murmuring something about his trains. Buckle up, I whispered to the empty freezing air. We are finally going home. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse with a severe brightness that felt almost overly aggressive. For the first time in 6 agonizing months, I woke up without the intense ache in my lower back that comes from sleeping in a bucket seat. I woke up to the incredible smell of brewing artisan coffee and the joyous sound of Leo laughing at a cartoon on a television that was bigger than the windshield of my car. Catherine Vance was already typing furiously on her tablet in the kitchen. She slid a porcelain cup of coffee toward me. Drink up, Mr. Bennett, she commanded. We have an urgent appointment in 40 minutes. Wear the charcoal suit in the closet. It is a little out of style, but it's clean. I showered and shaved the thick gray stubble off my hardened face. The man staring back at me in the mirror looked significantly different than the broken one from the gas station restroom. He looked tired, yes, but he didn't look defeated. The suit made me stand significantly straighter. I told Leo to closely stay with the professional housekeeper Catherine had arranged, kissed his forehead, and followed Catherine to the private elevator. But as we got closer, I easily saw the massive structural cracks. I saw the ivy deeply overgrowing the windows. It was a dying house that was dying along with its powerful owner. We were ushered into a dark library on the first floor that had been converted into a high-tech medical suite. The stagnant air smelled of harsh antiseptic and old, decaying paper. In the exact center of the room, dwarfed by a hospital bed, lay Preston Galloway. I vaguely remembered him as an aggressive shark, a ruthless man who could walk into a busy construction site and make seasoned foremen sweat with a single piercing glance. Now he looked like a fragile bird. His translucent skin was stretched tight over fragile bones. A clear oxygen tube ran deeply under his nose, but when he opened his eyes, the violent shark was still there. Mr. Galloway, this is Hal Bennett. Catherine stepped forward. Preston weakly raised a trembling hand, signaling the nurse to adjust his expensive bed. He took a shallow breath and pulled the oxygen mask away from his frail face. You look terrible, Bennett, he wheezed. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. I firmly stood my ground, holding my hat in my rough hands. You don't look like you're winning any beauty pageants yourself, Mr. Galloway. A dry hacking sound erupted from his fragile chest. It took me a tense moment to realize he was laughing. I like him, Preston stated. He hasn't changed, still has that stubborn jaw. He looked at me. Do you know why you're standing here, Hal? Because your paid lawyer pulled me out of a freezing car, I stated firmly. Preston shook his fragile head. You are here because of the foundation at the monolithic tower project. 1982. Do you remember it? I firmly nodded. It was the massive job that almost bankrupted me. I was the general contractor. We hit a pocket of soft clay halfway through the dig. The engineers said we urgently needed to go 10 feet deeper and use a significantly higher grade of concrete. Preston closed his eyes, yes, and every other paid contractor told me to quietly pour right over it. They said no one would ever know. They said it would save me $2 million. I told you I wouldn't put my professional name on a building that might fall down, I repeated. I told you I would personally eat the cost of the extra digging if you paid for the premium materials. And you did. Preston whispered. You lost your entire profit margin for the year to do the job right. You were the only one who didn't try to steal from me. He opened his eyes, the intensity frightening. I am dying, Hal. The expensive doctors give me a week, maybe 2, and the vicious vultures are actively circling. He pointed a bony finger at a massive stack of legal documents. The Sterling Group, your entitled in-laws. They have been trying to buy my company for an entire decade. They want my valuable land and permits, but mostly, they want to ruthlessly strip my valuable assets to cover their own massive debts. If Richard Sterling gets total control of Galloway Industries, he will immediately fire 5,000 hard-working people and sell the machinery for scrap within 1 month. I listened, feeling in cold knot form in my empty stomach. What can I do? I asked. I am a retired builder with $7 in his pocket. Preston coughed again, grimacing in severe pain. I don't need your money, I actively need a trusted proxy. Catherine smoothly stepped in to explain. Mr. Galloway legally owns 51% of the powerful voting shares in his massive company. When he passes, those shares legally go into an ironclad trust. He urgently needs to legally appoint a trusted trustee to manage those powerful votes for a strict period of 5 full years. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated, someone who intimately knows a terrible foundation the exact second he sees one. He actively wants you, Hal, Catherine stated firmly. I looked from her to the actively dying man in the expensive bed. You actively want me to run a billion-dollar company? No, Preston stated firmly. I already have a massive paid board of directors to run the boring business. I actively need you to hold the tight leash. You will have the absolute power to legally veto any massive merger or sale of valuable assets to the aggressive Sterling Group. You will precisely be the massive concrete wall they can't climb. And in exchange? I asked. In massive exchange, Preston said, his voice dropping to a raspy whisper. You legally get a guaranteed salary of $50,000 a month. And when the massive 5-year trust officially expires, you legally get 10% of the entire company's stock. You will never have to sleep in a freezing car again. You can burn Richard Sterling's entire world directly to the ground, and you can comfortably do it from the extreme comfort of my massive boardroom. I will do it, I firmly stated. Preston let out a massive long breath, his frail shoulders finally relaxing against the expensive pillows. Good, Catherine already has the massive papers. Sign them right now. I reached for the expensive pen Catherine was formally holding out. My rough hand hovered directly over the signature line. This was it, the absolute point of total no return. A massive, shrill ringtone shattered the extreme quiet of the medical room. It was Catherine's secure phone. She immediately frowned, checking the glowing screen. I urgently have to take this. It is my junior associate frantically calling from the downtown courthouse. She immediately stepped directly into the dark hallway. I waited, holding the expensive pen. Preston watched me. Do not hesitate, Hal, he wheezed. I was about to touch the expensive pen to the heavy paper when Catherine burst straight back into the room. Her beautiful face was pale, her strict professional composure gone. Stop, she stated breathless. We frantically have a massive problem. My junior associate saw Patricia Sterling maliciously filing an aggressive emergency motion at the probate court. So I stated, let her file, we legally have the deed. It isn't about the massive deed, Hal. Catherine looked at me with genuine, profound fear. Someone at the corrupt bank tipped her off. She knows you access the luxury penthouse. She knows you're meeting with Preston right now. She is maliciously filing for violent emergency custody of Leo. She maliciously claims you're mentally unstable and that you have kidnapped a vulnerable adult. The aggressive police are on their way to the penthouse apartment right now. The expensive pen dropped directly from my hand, hitting the floor with a massive sound like a gunshot. "Liu," I whispered. "He is alone with the terrified housekeeper," Catherine stated. "If the aggressive police get there before we do, they will hand him straight over to social services. And since Patricia is legally the closest next of kin, she will take him." I felt the intense blood draining from my face. She will take him to get directly to me. I didn't look back at Preston. I didn't look at the massive contract that could make me a massive millionaire. I turned and ran. I drove back to the massive apartment building, pushing the luxury sedan to 80 miles an hour on the busy expressway. My terrified heart was hammering against my ribs, but when I burst through the heavy oak door of the luxury penthouse, the profound silence that greeted me was the most terrifying sound of all. I expected aggressive police officers. I expected cruel social workers dragging my terrified son away. Instead, I miraculously found Leo peacefully sitting on the soft living room rug, happily building a massive tower out of colorful plastic blocks the kind housekeeper had found for him. I sent the terrified housekeeper home and double-locked the heavy deadbolt. I paced the pristine hardwood floor, waiting for the violent pounding of heavy fists. It came 20 minutes later, but it wasn't the terrifying thud of a police baton. It was the melodic, polite chime of the expensive doorbell. I checked the high-tech security camera feed. It wasn't the police. It was Patricia and Richard Sterling, and they were viciously smiling. I smoothed down the stiff front of my charcoal suit, took a deep breath, and yanked the heavy door open. "Hal," Patricia dramatically gasped, her manicured hand flying to her chest. "Thank God you're here. We have been so worried about you." She pushed past me before I could invite her in. Richard closely followed her, awkwardly carrying a massive wicker basket, meticulously wrapped in shiny gold cellophane. "We generously brought you something," Richard stated, setting the massive basket directly on the expensive granite island. "A small housewarming gift, some aged cheddar, an expensive bottle of vintage wine, and those exact truffles you used to like at Christmas." "What do you want, Patricia?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. Patricia turned to me, her fake eyes glistening with thick tears. "We actively came to deeply apologize, Hal. We acted poorly last night, but seeing you in that horrific state, living like that, it broke my heart. It didn't look like your cold heart was breaking," I stated firmly. "I didn't steal your money, Hal," she lied, the massive lie smooth. "I was protecting you. I put that massive money in a secure holding account. I was actively going to give it all straight back to you the exact moment you were mentally stable again." I watched her massive performance. If I hadn't heard her maliciously laughing about eagerly waiting for me to die, I might have believed her. "And now?" I asked, "Do I look stable enough for you now?" Richard quickly stepped forward. "Of course you do, old boy. Word on the street is that you had a massive meeting with Preston Galloway this exact morning. Preston is a vicious shark. We heard he offered you a powerful proxy role. Let Richard actively help you. Hal, you can officially hold the massive proxy, but Richard will do all the heavy lifting. He will clearly tell you how to vote. You sign where he clearly tells you and enjoy your life with Leo. You don't want to spend your twilight years fighting massive boardroom battles, do you?" I looked at them, the vicious wolf and the poisonous snake. They wanted to control Preston's massive company through me. And if I actively said no, the next aggressive step would be the aggressive police. I desperately needed massive time. "It is a massive lot to take in," I said slowly. "I am tired. Patricia, give me one day." Richard clapped his massive hands together. "That is all we actively ask." "Smart man." They moved toward the heavy door. "Goodbye, Leo." Patricia loudly called out, "Auntie Patricia will see you soon." Leo didn't even look up. He has good instincts. I closed the massive door behind them. I walked straight back to the granite kitchen island. The expensive gift basket actively sat there. It was pure, violent poison. I picked it up and walked straight over to the massive stainless steel trash compactor. I shoved the entire massive basket, golden bow and all, directly into the heavy bin and pressed the massive button. The heavy machine groaned and crunched until the massive basket was nothing but a flattened disk of complete garbage. But there was something else in the warm air, a violent prickling sensation precisely on the back of my neck. Patricia hadn't left an expensive gift basket. She wanted to spy on me. I knelt down and felt directly along the rough underside of the heavy glass coffee table. My calloused fingers brushed directly against something cool and plastic. A sophisticated listening device. My aggressive first instinct was to rip it straight off and smash it under my heavy heel. But I stopped myself. If I destroyed it, she would know I found it. My absolute biggest massive advantage was that she thought I was a senile, broken old man. I looked directly at the tiny device and smiled. You want to hear me, Patricia? Fine. I will give you a massive show. I stood up and walked over to Leo. I grabbed a small notepad and a pen from the pristine counter. I wrote in big block letters, "Do not talk nod." Leo nodded, his sweet face serious. He loved secret games. I took a deep breath and pitched my raspy voice loud and clear, aiming it directly right at the massive coffee table. "Leo," I said, sounding defeated, "I have been thinking about what your Aunt Patricia said." I intentionally paused for dramatic effect, shuffling my heavy feet on the hardwood floor to sound agitated. "Maybe she's right, son. Look at this massive place. It is too much for us. I'm 70 years old. I can't run a massive building. I can't manage massive money. I can barely remember where I put my damn glasses half the time." I winked directly at Leo. He covered his small mouth to actively stop a giggle. I think I'm going to sign those massive proxy papers tomorrow," I continued, injecting a massive tremor directly into my heavy voice. "Richard knows about massive business. He can take care of the aggressive stocks. He can take care of the intense money. We will take a small allowance and maybe go to Florida." "Florida sounds nice, no more fighting. I'm so tired of fighting." I let out a long, ragged sigh that would have won me an Oscar. "I am going to lie down for a little bit. Leo, you closely watch your show. We will actively call Aunt Patricia in the early morning and actively tell her the good news." I didn't close it all the way, leaving it a tiny hair ajar so it wouldn't click and actively alert the massive bug. I took the massive concrete stairs down instead of the loud elevator. I didn't want to leave a digital trail. My explicit destination wasn't the pristine lobby, but the dirty basement, the noisy mechanical room. It was the heart of the entire building, noisy with the aggressive hum of heavy boilers and the violent rush of massive water pumps. It was the one noisy place in the massive building where no sophisticated listening device could pick up a quiet conversation directly over the aggressive industrial din. Catherine Vance was already there, actively waiting by the dirty service entrance, as we had arranged via a secure text message earlier. She looked out of place in the dusty basement in her tailored, expensive suit. She was actively pacing, checking her expensive watch. "You found it?" she asked as soon as she saw me. "Under the exact coffee table," I said, brushing heavy dust off my old sleeve. I gave her a massive earful. By now, she's probably opening an expensive bottle of vintage champagne to celebrate my massive surrender. Catherine let out in sharp breath. "Good, that buys us about 12 intense hours. But we have a significantly bigger massive problem. Hal, we need significantly more than a massive defense tomorrow. We need a massive aggressive offense. We actively need to prove that she's unfit. We need to prove that her intense interest in Leo is purely financial. I need to get directly into her massive books," I said. "Not the fake ones she shows the strict IRS, the real ones." Catherine actively shook her beautiful head. "That is impossible. The Sterlings have forensic accountants who bury everything. Unless you have a massive search warrant, which we don't, we can't actively touch their massive records." "I actively don't need a massive warrant," I said, a massive aggressive plan actively forming in my intense mind. "I need a massive blueprint." Catherine actively looked at me confused. "A massive blueprint?" "I built the massive Sterling Global Headquarters," I actively said. 20 fierce years actively ago, Richard wanted a massive private office that was actively soundproof. He was deeply paranoid even back then. He actively made me install a massive hidden wall safe behind the expensive mahogany paneling. But he was cheap. He didn't actively want to pay for the expensive, high-end digital lock. He actively made me install a massive old mechanical one. "An heavy old Yale model, so?" Catherine actively asked. So I grinned a cold, humorless, intense grin. I didn't install it. I actively set the massive, intense combination, and Richard is an incredible, heavy creature of intense exact habit. He uses the intense same heavy numbers for everything. His incredible birthday, his intense wedding anniversary, And the massive day he took over the intense company. You actively want to break into the massive Sterling headquarters. Catherine whispered, actively looking around the dirty basement, as if the loud, massive boilers were actively listening. Hall, that's breaking and actively entering. That is a massive, heavy felony. If you actively get caught, you go to massive, intense prison, and Patricia wins everything by massive default. I am not actively going to break in, I corrected actively her. I am going to inspect the massive structural heavy integrity of a huge building I actively constructed. I actively still have my intense massive master heavy keys, Catherine. I never threw them actively heavy away. A massive intense heavy builder always actively keeps a intense heavy massive set, in intense case of fierce heavy massive emergencies. This isn't a fierce heavy leaky massive pipe, Hal. No, I actively said, it is an incredible heavy fierce massive rot, and I'm going to actively cut it heavy out. The silence in the penthouse was different than the silence in the freezing car. In the car it was cold and tight, but it was shared. Here, in this sprawling apartment, the silence was a physical weight. It pressed against my eardrums. I walked into the bedroom Leo had used for one night. The bed was unmade. The pillow still held the indentation of his head. A small plastic train engine lay on the nightstand, left behind in the absolute chaos of the morning. I picked it up. My large hand engulfed the small toy. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the expensive mattress groaning under my weight. I should have been thinking like prey, because while I was planning a heist, Patricia Sterling was planning an ambush. It didn't start with a phone call. It started with a heavy, rhythmic pounding on the front door that shook the frame. The kind of knock that demands compliance. Leo dropped his toast, his eyes going wide with sudden panic. He hates loud noises. I stood up, my heart hammering a warning rhythm, and walked to the door, checking the monitor. My blood ran cold. Standing next to Patricia were two uniformed police officers and a woman in a navy blue windbreaker holding a clipboard. Adult Protective Services. Mr. Bennett, a male voice boomed through the wood. This is the police. Open the door or we will breach. We have a court order. I had no choice. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Patricia stood behind the officers, her face a perfect mask of tragic concern. Hal, she cried out, her voice trembling. Thank God he's alive. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. I am Janet Ross with Adult Protective Services. We have received credible reports regarding the immediate safety of a vulnerable adult, Leo Bennett. We have an emergency removal order signed by a judge this morning. Removal? I stepped into the doorway, blocking their path. You aren't removing anyone. He is fine, Mr. Bennett. We have sworn affidavits stating that for the last 6 months, you have forced your son to live in a vehicle without adequate heat or nutrition, Ms. Ross said coldly. And we have testimony that your mental state has deteriorated to the point where you're a danger. I looked at Patricia. This was her ruthless move. She took the suffering she inflicted on us and weaponized it. She starved us, and now she was calling the police because we were hungry. That's a lie, I shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Patricia. We were in that car because she stole our money. She controls the trust. The officers moved instantly. One grabbed my left arm, the other my right. They were strong, younger than me by 30 years. Miss Ross walked past me, straight into the kitchen. Leo, she said loudly. Come with me. Leo looked up, his eyes wild. He saw me being held by the police. He saw a stranger reaching for him. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He screamed. He scrambled backward, knocking over the chair, curling into a ball in the corner. Don't touch him, I roared, struggling against the officers. You're scaring him. Miss Ross didn't listen. She grabbed Leo by the arm and pulled him up. He flailed his limbs in sheer panic. The cops dragged my son, my gentle boy who loved trains, across the floor like a criminal. Patricia stood in the doorway watching. For a split second, our eyes met. There was a cold, satisfied gleam in her eyes. She had found the one thing I cared about more than justice, and she was taking it. Hal, please don't make this harder. Patricia said loud enough for the police to hear. It is for his own good. You are a monster, I screamed, tears streaming down my face. I will kill you for this. The officer slammed me against the wall. That's enough. Old man, stay here. I watched helplessly as they dragged Leo out the door. He was sobbing now, reaching a hand toward me. Daddy, help. Patricia thought she had won. She thought she had broken me. She was wrong. By taking Leo, she had removed the only thing holding me back. He was in the system now, which meant I had nothing left to lose. I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. The eyes staring back were the eyes of a man with a mission. "You want to play dirty, Patricia?" I whispered. "I'm going to start with the foundation you're standing on." I grabbed my old phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in a decade. Joe Miller. Joe had been the site supervisor on the Sterling headquarters project. He was fired 2 days after Leo's accident. Richard had blamed Joe for the safety lapse. I had believed him. I called him. We met an hour later at an all-night diner. Joe looked older, beaten down by life. "I need to know about the steel beam, Joe," I said, cutting straight to the point. "They took Leo today. I think they're afraid of what I might remember." Joe sighed, shame written in the lines of his face. "It wasn't me, Hal. I fought him on it, Richard. We were 2 weeks behind schedule. The crane rental was costing 10 grand a day. Richard came to the site and ordered us to bypass the secondary bracing. He said it was overkill. I told him it was dangerous. He told me if I didn't give the order to lift, he would fire me on the spot." My hand gripped the coffee mug. "Secondary bracing takes 4 hours to install. Richard crippled my son to save 4 hours of labor." "Do you have proof?" I asked. "He shredded the office copies," Joe whispered. "But you know me, Hal. I kept my own field diary." Joe slid a battered, water-stained notebook across the table. "I've kept it in a shoebox for 10 years. I opened the book November 14th. 0800 hours, Richard Sterling on site, ordered removal of secondary bracing, cited budget overruns. I advised against, he overruled, and there at the bottom of the page was a scrawled set of initials next to a timestamp. R.S. Richard had signed the daily log. He had signed his own confession. I tucked the notebook inside my coat. "Go home, Joe," I said, "and lock your doors. When I drop this bomb, the shockwave is going to hit everyone." The Sterling estate looked like a fortress of light against the pitch-black sky. They were having a party, less than 12 hours after dragging my terrified son out of his home. Patricia Sterling was hosting a gala. I stood in the tree line, pulling my coat tighter. I knew every secret passage of this house, because I had renovated it 15 years ago. I skirted the edge of the lawn, slipping into the garage through a service door by punching in Patricia's old college graduation year. I bypassed the catered kitchen, took the servant's staircase, and slipped into Patricia's home office on the second floor. I walked straight to the built-in bookshelf. I reached behind the third shelf, finding the hidden latch I had installed, and popped the false panel open. Behind it sat a small gray safe. I pulled out a high-powered magnet from my pocket and slid it over the cheap solenoid lock. Click, inside were stacks of cash and a black leather ledger. I opened it, 2 sets of books. One column showed inflated maintenance costs for the Oaks. The other showed the actual cash flow transfers to offshore accounts and payments for Patricia's Mercedes. I pulled out the high-definition camera Catherine had given me and snapped photos of every single page. Evidence of tax fraud and embezzlement. I heard footsteps in the hallway, voices getting closer. I shoved the ledger back into the safe, but didn't have time to close the panel. I dove behind the heavy velvet curtains as the door clicked open. Patricia stumbled into the room holding a wine glass, followed by another woman. "I finally got rid of the dead weight," Patricia laughed, her voice slurred with expensive champagne. "My brother-in-law, the old leech. I had him and his son thrown out today, my fists clenched. I filed for custody this morning," Patricia continued. "The state took the boy. Once the boy is in the system, Hal will break. He'll sign over the voting rights to the Galloway shares to get him back. And once I have those shares, Richard and I will own this town." "But isn't that illegal?" The other woman gasped. "Who's going to believe a senile old man?" Patricia waved her hand. "I have the judges in my pocket. By next week, Hal will be in a state-run nursing home drooling into a cup." I pressed the record button on my phone. There it was, the smoking gun. She had admitted to the conspiracy, the bribery, and the malicious intent. They clinked glasses and walked out, leaving the door open. I stepped out from the curtains, closed the safe panel, and climbed out the second-story window, scaling down the thick ivy trellis I had built years ago. The war was over, the slaughter was about to begin, the courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old lies. I sat at the defendant's table next to Catherine Vance. Across the aisle, Patricia sat with her high-priced legal team, playing the role of the grieving aunt. Her lawyer, Mr. Stone, painted a picture of me as a paranoid, unstable hoarder who forced his son to live in the freezing cold. Patricia took the stand, sobbing on command, claiming she wanted Leo to be safe. The judge looked sympathetic to her tears. The narrative was being set in stone. When it was our turn, Catherine didn't offer a defense. She offered a demolition. Your Honor, the narrative you have heard is a carefully constructed fiction designed to conceal a systematic embezzlement of funds, Catherine announced, her voice ringing clear. She pressed play on the voicerecorder. Patricia's drunken, arrogant voice filled the courtroom, boasting about bribing judges and using Leo as leverage for corporate shares. The gasps in the courtroom were audible. Patricia froze, her face draining of color. But Catherine wasn't done. She called Joe Miller to the stand and submitted the water-stained field diary. The judge read the entry detailing Richard's cost-cutting order that caused Leo's brain injury. He saw Richard's own signature. "This isn't negligence," Judge Thorne thundered, his voice echoing off the walls. "This is depraved indifference. You crippled a young man to save a day of crane rental fees." Patricia jumped up, frantically trying to distance herself from Richard. "I didn't know. Richard handled the construction." It was a bloodbath. The judge slammed his gavel. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice. Mrs. Sterling, you're ordered to vacate the position of trustee immediately. A forensic accountant will audit every transaction." The judge turned to the deputies. "Mr. Sterling, you aren't leaving this building today without a police escort. I'm referring this matter for criminal investigation." Richard was handcuffed on the spot, but I didn't care about him. The courtroom doors opened, and Leo was led in by a terrified social worker. "Daddy!" Leo screamed, breaking away from the guards and running straight into my arms. I held him so tight I thought I might crush him. "I got you, Leo," I whispered, tears soaking his shirt. "Nobody is ever taking you away again." Preston Galloway died 3 days later. The reading of the will took place the following Monday in the main conference room of Vance & Associates. Richard and Patricia were there, desperate to find a loophole to save their sinking empire. Richard was out on bail, looking gray and terrified. Catherine opened the sealed document and read Preston's final requests. When she reached the real estate portfolio, she looked directly at Richard. Regarding the land parcel, designated as Plot 44B in the downtown district, Catherine read, "The Sterling headquarters was built in 1925 on land that was leased. A 99-year ground lease. That lease expired yesterday." Richard stopped breathing. In his final act, Mr. Galloway transferred the deed to Plot 44B to a new owner. Catherine continued, sliding the heavy document across the mahogany table toward me. "Mr. Bennett, congratulations. You are now the sole owner of the land under the Sterling Global headquarters." Richard looked like he had been shot in the chest. "You can't do this. That building is worth $200 million. It's a pile of bricks sitting on my dirt," I said calmly. "And when a ground lease expires, the tenant becomes a squatter." Patricia slammed her hand on the table. "We'll tie this up in court for decades." "I am a reasonable man," I said, standing up and picking up the deed. "I'll give you the exact same courtesy you gave me and Leo. You have 24 hours to vacate my property. Or I'm willing to sign a month-to-month lease extension. The new rent is $5 million a month, payable in advance." Richard's jaw dropped. $5 million. "We can't afford that. We'll be bankrupt." "Then you have 30 days to dismantle your building and move it somewhere else," I said, cold as ice. "I know it's a terrible thing to lose your home. Make sure you pack warm clothes, Richard. It gets cold at night." It took less than a month for the Sterling Empire to crumble. The stock plummeted. The forensic audit uncovered a decade of tax evasion. Patricia was arrested, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. Richard was indicted on felony charges. They viciously turned on each other to save their own skins. I didn't attend their trials. I had better things to do. 6 months later, I sat on a sunny park bench, watching Leo play kickball with a group of adults. He was laughing, safe and happy. Behind the park stood a newly renovated brick building, the Leo Bennett Center for Neurorehabilitation. I had built it using the first massive rent check from the tech company that gladly took over the old Sterling Tower. They thought I was a broken old builder. They forgot that a builder knows how to spot a crack in the foundation. and they forgot the most important rule of all. You never, ever mess with a man's children. I smiled, watching my son run. We weren't surviving anymore. We were finally living.